So I'm Lance James. I'm with Versus.Evil. We're going to go over today talking about publishing your game on consoles. That includes working with Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, those guys. Hi, Ronaldo. Thanks for that. A little bit about me, so you know I'm not just full of shit. Well, first off, I'm from a great little country called Texas, so I've got this unique accent. So if I say a word you guys don't understand, just raise your hand or throw something at me or whatever. I'll try to rephrase the words. Secondly, I cuss, so sorry. There will be cussing. That'll happen. Just part of it. So my experience with working on consoles dates back to 2010, basically. So I've worked on everything from Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo, Wii U, all that stuff to all the modern platforms. So I've been around for a while to see the console kind of market get better over time, frankly. However, it's still a giant pain in the ass. There's no way around it. It takes time, it's painful, but it's gotten a lot better. Hopefully you guys can learn from some of my past experiences, past problems, which we'll kind of go through here in a little bit. So obviously, working on console, you've got a few things you got to do first. And that's basically your general housekeeping items. So say you want to publish on Sony. You've got to go to them. You've got to get your game approved. You've got to become an approved developer. You've got to get your agreements in order, all the paperwork, all the rather boring stuff, frankly, to make sure that you are a legit developer. You're not going to steal their kits. You're not going to ship them to somewhere crazy. You're not going to sell them on the black market, all that good stuff. You're signing your life away, basically. Obviously, you need a finished game. You can certainly take a game that's unfinished to console or start the porting process. However, it's 1,000 times easier just to work on a finished code base. That'll make whoever's doing the porting so much happier. No code merges, no last-minute changes, nothing to break the game. If you're working on a finished code base, it makes a huge difference. Then obviously each console has its own specific feature set, its own specific work that needs to be done, whether that's Xbox Live integrations, achievements, PlayStation Network, whatever you're doing for free-to-play, if you're doing free-to-play, online multiplayer hookups. Each separate platform has their own unique work that you've got to do. Bottom thing there is actually pretty important. That's your ratings. Once you go to console, you have to have ratings. You launch on Steam, you launch on certain mobile markets, you might not need a rating. Once you go with these guys, you have to get ESRB, PEGI, USK, OFLC, COB. There's just a whole crapload of them. And it's nothing overly complicated, it just takes time. You have to fill out a bunch of paperwork, send in a copy of your game. It just takes time. It's getting a lot easier. There's a new system called the IARC, meaning if you're doing digitally only, you can self-rate your game through their portal, and it takes a few minutes. It's super awesome. That's the future. That's where it'll be. It's not quite there yet. Nintendo does it right now. Microsoft will start to do it when they transition to the Partner Center, and Sony will probably be pretty soon in behind. But ratings themselves, they just take time. Sadly, the longest one is OFLC or COB, and that's Australia and New Zealand, our Kiwis and our Aussies. They take anywhere up to a month and a half, 2 months. It just takes time, frankly, and those are things that have to be submitted with your games. You can't start the submission process, you can't start certification, you can't do any of that stuff until you have all your ratings in hand and finished. Otherwise, you can't sell in those territories, which obviously you guys want to sell your game in as many territories as possible. So these are just some basic tips. These are probably what you guys will find most useful. You want to give yourself as much time as possible when going to console. Far too often, we'll see a developer who hasn't even done any of the initial work say they're going to launch on Xbox, in 2 weeks. Okay, that's not going to happen. Between ratings, all the agreements, all that stuff, it takes time. All of it takes time. Even just the certification part of it alone, which I'll show you guys here in a little bit. It's anywhere from a month to several months of just certification after you've done all the initial legwork. And this is after you've done all the specific work for the platform itself as well. Language. So that's also a fun thing. Each platform, they're all pretty similar at this point, right? Whether you're working on Xbox or PlayStation or Nintendo. They're all pretty similar in what you're doing. However, each platform holder has their own unique language. So Big one, for example, on Xbox, it's called certification. That's what you're going through to get your game, approved by Microsoft. Just call it certification in dealing with Microsoft. If you call it FQA, that's what Sony uses. They're very peculiar about their language. And if you say something wrong or say something that clearly Nintendo uses or Sony uses, they'll point it out. They'll make a note of it. It's nothing bad, because it's just an accident. It happens. But if you learn to use their language when talking to them, it will just help you tenfold, especially with Nintendo these days. You're going through lot check. You're submitting a ROM. You're submitting all these specific terms that are specific to Nintendo. If you use them, it will help you, because that way they don't email back saying, do you mean a ROM? Do you mean lot check? Do you mean release dates? Do you mean products? Do you mean product code? Just learn their language. Learn the language of the product holder, and that will help you tremendously. POC, which is sadly an acronym. It's not a POC, but it's point of contact. And this is something that helps out a lot in dealing with the platforms. Oftentimes, when you first start working with any of these platform holders, you'll just have an email address or an alias that you'll email. And it could be something like help@Xbox or ID Games at Xbox or whatever. And that's just a large group of people who will check that email address, and eventually, someone will come back and help you. However, and what I highly recommend, try to find yourself a dedicated point of contact. That way you have a person you can go to. And if at all possible, try to get his cell phone number. It's a lot easier for a publisher. It's a lot easier for somebody who works in these platforms all the time for that to happen. But it makes life 1,000 times easier to have somebody that I can talk to, and I'm stuck in FQA, or I'm waiting on a report back from Sony. It's like, hey man, I'll just text them. Hey man, can you check on this? Whereas, oftentimes you're stuck emailing an alias where you don't know if they've seen it. You don't know when you'll get a response. You don't know who's answering. They don't know you. Whereas a dedicated point of contact is somebody you establish a connection with. Someone can help you, just immediately, solve your problem. Or not immediately, but just kind of help you more intimately solve your problem, because they know you. They know what you're doing. Planning. Planning's a big one, just like your game. If you want to release your game on Steam or you want to finish your game, you've got a plan. You've got a production schedule. You've got an overall goal of what you want to achieve. The same is true on consoles, and I'll go over the timeline here in a little bit, but between timing and giving yourself enough time and planning out for things, you'll save a ton of headaches. What's great is if you get done early, great. More opportunities will arise, and I'll go over that as well. But you definitely want to plan this out. Give yourself enough time, whether that's a couple months, or if you're doing physical retail, give yourself like 6 or 8 months. If you're working with a publisher, you can work with them on a schedule. You definitely want to budget in time for this to take. This will take time. Budget in that. Plan it out. You want to be done with certification on this date. You want to be done with all of your marketing submission on this date. You want to have all the stuff in and done and just over with. That way you have it planned out. You've already thought about it. You know how long it's going to take. You don't want to be trying to just get everything done in a matter of minutes or in a matter of weeks. It's a pain in the ass. It's a headache. You don't want to piss off the guys you're trying to work with. You don't want to be emailing Sony every 5 minutes saying, hey, where's this? Or hey, what's happening? You don't want that. You want to be as respectful, because they're doing tons of games. They're working on tons of projects. You want to be respectful. You want to be, you want to be aware of their time. So the more you plan, the more you give yourself time, the more that works out in your favor. Documentation, which is also always fun. Every one of the platforms has tons of crappy documentation, whether that's a MDT form or that's a game submission form or whether that's a certification report form or whatever. Each platform has a ton of paperwork that you need to figure out and learn and look up. And frankly, each platform has it on their help and on their resources. However, the best way is just to get in there and just start doing stuff. All of them are really good about giving you feedback, and they're not doing it to be mean. They'll just tell you, hey, you filled this out wrong. Can you fill it out again? Honestly, that's the best way to do it. Just go in there, do your best, fill it out as best you can, and get it done. And get it done as early as possible. Some things you can't do till the very end because you need your finished game. There's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of documentation, especially a lot of the marketing side of things that you can get done ahead of time. That way you have it done and set aside. And that might even open up more opportunities if you get done early. That way the marketing teams can look at it. They can take a look at it. They can figure out what they want to do with it. A big one, you will have questions at some point. You'll stumble upon something that doesn't make sense, or an acronym that doesn't make you don't find it anywhere. Or what's really good is unlock a test kit, an error code will pop up. Well, the error 133 doesn't mean jack shit to me. So what does that do? Nintendo, which is super awesome, used to pop up in Japanese every now and then. So me being the poor little country guy, I don't read Japanese very well. So yeah, I would take screenshots of that and like, help. I don't know what this means. Don't be afraid to ask questions. That's what these guys are there for. They're there to help you through the process. Working with a publisher or working with a consultant will also help you tremendously in this aspect. But don't be afraid to ask Xbox, Sony, or Nintendo questions. They know how complicated their systems are. They're fully aware of how complicated their systems are. And they are making them better. They're making them easier. But they know what it's like. They see it all the time. They have lots of resources available for help as well. Microsoft specifically has teams of engineers that are available for you guys that if you're stuck with a problem, some achievement's not unlocking correctly, or rich presence isn't displaying properly, you can't figure it out. Well, they might tell you to go to the forums or look up your own problem or whatever. If that doesn't work, just ask them, hey, do you have someone who can help me? Yes, they do. They have teams of people set aside that's their job, is to help people through the process and help them finish their game. Sony's the same way. Nintendo's the same way. They have their job is to get your games, your content, onto their platform. So it's in their interest to help you guys. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Far too often, I'll have developers, even my own developers, they'll have an issue and they'll think they can find it on Google or DevNet or the forums or whatever. It's like, no, let's just go ask the dude. Or let's just go ask. Like, it's just so much simpler. It'll save you time, it'll save you a headache. Sometimes it might not even be your problem, it might be their problem. In that case, well, they need to fix it. So it's things like that. Don't be afraid to ask questions. They may seem intimidating, they may seem whatever, just don't be afraid to ask them questions at all. And the last one there, this is not a shameless plug for a publisher, which Versus.Evil is, it's to work with someone with experience. It helps. A publisher or a consultant that does this all the time has a dedicated person they work with. They already know the schedules, they know the terminology, they know how much time certain things will take. They know, I don't want to say loopholes, but they know how to avoid certain situations. They know how to book all your slots for testing. They know who to talk to at the FQA teams. They've been through it before. They have experience in doing this. This is what they do. You can certainly do all this yourself. You can self-publish. Nothing wrong with that at all. It is a giant headache. Even for people who do it all the time, it's a giant headache. It's a pain in my ass. But I've been through it enough now where I can do a lot of this in my sleep. I don't want to, but I can. It's not easier by any means. It's just we can avoid certain things. We can save time. We can talk to our person, our release manager, our account manager directly, and hey man, just letting you know this is coming up. This is what we want to do. This is what we want to release. And we can kind of make some stuff happen. Working with someone with experience is a huge help. Even if it's just a consultant to come in and say, help you plan out what you want to do or get your paperwork in order or to help you with ratings or whatever it may be. That experience will save you time, it'll save you money, and it'll definitely save you a headache. So the process itself, and this is mainly the development side of things, and this is stuff like getting your game ready for certification, ready for FQA, ready for lot check. Once you click that button to submit your game or submit your ROM, this is what this process means. The marketing side is a little bit different, still takes a lot of time, has its own little catchphrases, its own little problems, what have you. But this is strictly for like the certification process or FQA or lot check. So as you can see, they each take time, and this is digital only as well. So publishing your game digitally, you're looking at anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 weeks. And that's from clicking submit and having Microsoft or Sony or Nintendo look at your game to, hey, we approve your game. You're good to go. This is the time it takes for that. It's gotten a lot better. This is actually from last year. Now, most recently, most of my games for Xbox, I'll do certification. It'll take about 10 days, which is awesome. PlayStation is anywhere from 3 days to like 7 these days, which is awesome. So they've improved greatly. Nintendo, on the other hand, is still kind of a mystery. My last 2 games, I had the first one go through in 3 days for lot check, and then the next one, which was a offline single-player game, which should have been easier, it took 4.5 weeks. So, no idea. Nintendo takes the longest, and they are very, very much trying to change that. And I think you can see that if you go onto NDP or the Nintendo Developer Portal. They're trying to improve things all the time, but it's still one of those things that they're figuring out their own bugs. It's getting better, but it takes time. And what's also key to note is that you guys will probably fail certification. You'll fail FQA. You'll fail lot check. It's not a bad thing. It's just that you have so many rules, so many XRs, so many TRCs that you've got to be responsible for. It's just, it happens. There's no way to avoid it. So you will have failures. What that means is you've got to resubmit. You've got to redo your ROM. You've got to fix a bug, fix a localization issue. Somewhere the game might stutter to 29 frames a second instead of being locked at 30. Well, whatever little bug it may be, you gotta go back and fix that. And resubmit, not that big of a deal. But if you resubmit, it restarts the clock. So say Xbox gets my game back in 10 days, I get a failure, it takes me 10 days to fix it, I resubmit, all of a sudden that's a month gone because of one failure. Just something to keep in mind. So I'm not going to go into overly detail here, but this is kind of what it looks like to publish on Microsoft Xbox One. Big thing here is that this largely all applies to a thing called XDP, which is Xbox Developer Portal. That's about to go away. Hopefully by June, we're going to be on a thing called the Microsoft Partner Center, which is, so far, it's been pretty awesome. It's very self-serving in a lot of ways. Lots of things where I used to rely on Microsoft for, I can go in and do certain things on my own without having to talk to my account manager or without having to get approval. I can just do it. So Microsoft is changing that, and that's supposed to be with everyone by June of this year, I believe. So that's a good thing. I unfortunately don't have a lot of information to share about it. A lot of this stuff still applies, however, which, frankly, it's a lot of crap you guys got to do. It's all the product configurations, like you got to tell what your game is, how many players it is, how do you play the game, is it on a controller, is it on a whatever, is it just for Xbox, is it for Windows 10, is it online, offline, is it RPG, is it, all the typical like product setup stuff. Catalog and artwork, so that's stuff like your marketing stuff. Lots of artwork, lots of weird sizes, file sizes, things like that. Marketplace, same thing. You got to figure out how you want your product to look like on the Xbox Marketplace. Then there's the sandbox, which is much more of your development sandbox. That's where you'll set up all of your typical Xbox-specific work. And frankly, it may seem intimidating, but it's not really that much work. If you've launched a game on Steam, you probably already have Steam achievements. A lot of those you can carry over directly. If you've localized your game, you can probably carry over a lot of your localization. You'll have new localization strings you need to do for Xbox, but it won't be that bad. Oftentimes, we have most of our developers find that they've already done this work, they just have to do it again, which is a bit of a bummer, but it's not overly complicated. So, certification, right? That's when you want to, it's when I'm done, I'm ready for Microsoft to look at my game. I'm ready for them to tell me this is ready to go, this isn't ready to go, what do I need to do? However, before you get there is something you can do, and I highly recommend it if you have time. This goes back to budgeting your time and planning out your schedule. Microsoft has optional certifications, which are great. Essentially, they take a quick look at your game, and they'll go through a quick list of the XRs, and they'll just tell you. Very short, they won't go into high detail, but you're failing this XR has a problem, we wouldn't pass it because of this, you may want to look at this. They'll say things very generally, and it's very helpful. But it'll help you, and it'll make your first pass on certification that much easier, because they will point out certain failures, certain things that, small things, small hiccups that you guys can certainly avoid. Once you get to certification, there's a whole lot of extra documentation that I was talking about earlier you guys have to have done. So you can see there kind of a list of things. It's a lot of work, but it's nothing overly complicated. It's just stuff you've got to do. Fill out your paperwork, fill out your certification form, fill out your ratings, fill out your test accounts, your symbols. There's a whole list of stuff on there you can't miss it. It's very simple. But it's just stuff you got to do, and it takes some time, especially if you're doing it by yourself. This might take you a week to get all the stuff together. There's a certain format all the stuff has to be in as well. So it's a pain in the ass. It's not overly complicated. It just takes time. So I went through the process already a little bit. This is a more detailed process of how you want to prepare for certification and what you're doing with Microsoft. But basically, once you click start and once you submit, it's all up to Microsoft, and they can take, like I said, lately it's 3 to 7 days, which is great. And they may give you a first-time go, which would be awesome. They may fail you. They may fail you 3 or 4 times, which would suck. But it is what it is. It's their process. You have to deal with it, and you have to get through it. I do want to stress that failing certification isn't a bad thing. I mean, I forgot what the statistic is, but most teams fail twice. So not a bad thing, not the end of the world. Don't freak out. Just fix it, resubmit, not a big deal. So once you've passed certification, which is super awesome, that's great for your development side of things. There's a whole other side of the process with Microsoft, which is the marketing side of things. It takes a lot of time as well. But what I want to stress here is you can kind of read through that stuff. When you pass certification, you're officially ready to launch within 2 or 3 weeks, because once that happens, the store team and the ops team kind of take over. They do their thing. However, and I've seen it happen multiple times, don't rush your game to launch. If you can, let it sit there for a month. Let it sit there for 2 months. All sorts of opportunities arise where Microsoft or Sony, they have a show coming up. They have E3 coming up. They've got a marketing commitment coming up. They've got ad space coming up. They have all these things popping up that they need games for. And if your game's sitting there, it's through certification, you're fully approved, it looks really good to them. And it's happened multiple times to our titles, to other publishers' titles. It's opening yourself up to more opportunities, which is very, very good. Yeah, I do want to stress, once you're through with certification, don't rush to launching your game if you can avoid it. It's great to let it sit there and let Microsoft look at it and play with it if at all possible. So, quick summary of Microsoft, kind of all that stuff there. I will fully advise you guys to get added to the newsletter, which will probably be changing with Partner Center. Get added to that. It does help. Lots of handy tips, lots of information. They give a schedule of what's upcoming for them. It's very handy. Sony, I'm not going to go into too much detail because I'm running out of time, but it's virtually the same thing, just different terminology. And that's the thing I want to stress. Nowadays, Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft all basically have the same process. They use different terminology, but largely it's the same stuff. If you fill it out for one platform, you might as well just do all 3, because at this point, they're very similar. Terminology is different, but it's largely all the same crap. They want to know about your game, how big's your game, what kind of game is it, what are the problems, that sort of stuff. I will stress that Sony does take probably the longest with setting up your game. You get on DevNet, you've got request services through each of the regions still, which is changing. It's beginning to change as well. But you've obviously got lots of regions you have to work with, whereas Microsoft, you don't. So it's one of those things, you're going to have what looks like 4 different SKUs, depending on what territories you want to launch in, and you've got to set the game up 4 times. You got to do the paperwork 4 times, which obviously is just a pain in the ass. Same game 4 times. Nothing overly complicated. The difference here is that for Sony, you've got FQA instead of certification. Same thing. They're looking at what's wrong with your game. Is your game, does the PlayStation trophies unlock correctly? Does PlayStation Live work correctly? Does everything tie in correctly? Does the accounts work? Do all of our warning labels say PlayStation 4 instead of Xbox? Does this say joypad or directional stick instead of joypad? Stuff like that. Largely the same thing as certification, but they call it FQA. Nothing overly complex, just takes time, once again. Same general process, you have to book your slots, tell them when you want to do it, then you start FQA. Not overly complicated, just takes time. PlayStation does have TPRnet, however. So you have DevNet, which is mainly your game services, how you set your game up, but you have TPRnet, which is largely, that's your marketing side of things. That's where you're going to do all of your store submissions, all of your imagery, all of your ratings, all of that kind of marketing store asset type of thing. It's a separate portal, takes time, but you can do it whenever. So I highly recommend doing all of this stuff whenever you can. Get it done and get out of the way. So Nintendo Switch, once again, very similar process. Instead of calling it certification or FQA, it's lot check. Instead of calling it a game or whatever, it's a ROM. You have ROMs on Nintendo. Largely the same process. I will say Nintendo is still changing things. It used to be very complicated. It used to be done through Jira, essentially. Now you have NDP, Nintendo Developer Portal. It's getting better and better every day. I mean, they do constant updates. And it's still a new thing for them to allow this many outside games onto their platform. So it's an evolving platform for them, which is great. But it's getting better and better every day. They're not called products on Nintendo. They're called releases, which is great. But basically, it's the same thing. Same documents, same information. What's your game? What do you want to do with it? Why should someone play it? That sort of thing. Not overly complicated. It just takes time. And Nintendo arguably takes the most time because oftentimes, for no apparent reason, it'll just sit there for a week or 2 weeks before someone actually looks at it. Nintendo also has lots of great portals. So you have NCMS, which is your marketing side of things. You've got Slim, which is all your legal documentation. You've got OMOS, which if you're doing anything on online worlds, online multiplayer, you got to get all that stuff set up. Quick summary, if you don't know, ask for help. That's the quickest thing to do. Give yourself time. I'll stress that as much as possible. Give yourself lots of time to get through console. That's the best thing you can do for yourself. Documentation, get all that crap done as early as possible. And finally, just work with someone. That helps tremendously. Cool. Thanks, guys.
All right, Lance. Thank you. We have time for just a couple of